Welcome, everyone. I have the pleasure to welcome all the participants online and our panelists. I'm Christina Corbain, the coordinator of the Disaster Risk Management Knowledge Center, organizing today this side event. Very briefly, the Disaster Risk Management Knowledge Center is the first knowledge center of the European Commission that was launched in 2015 to improve the knowledge base on disaster risks. We provide a networked interface between science and policies in the field of disaster risk management, drawing upon the expertise of the scientists of the Joint Research Center. This side event is a joint effort between scientists, practitioners, and policymakers from the participating organizations to build the evidence base to inform future action on disaster risks. Together with our experts, we will address current and future risks with the aim of getting a better understanding on how recent scientific developments translate into new data and tools to help acting on disaster risks. Let me give you an overview of the structure of this event, which will have two main focuses, each covered in a dedicated part. In part one of our side event, we will look into data and systems for assessment of current risks and recording of damages and losses, building on the Risk Data Hub and its applications. And the second part, we will learn how informed climate change risk helps quantifying the impacts of climate and social-economic trends on the risks of future humanitarian crises. There will be 6 presentations that will be followed by a moderated discussion and a Q&A, during which you will have the opportunity as participants online to pose questions to our experts via the dedicated Slido. And you should have the Slido code shown now here on the screen. Let me now introduce and pass the floor to our 3 experts of the first part of the side event. Mr. Andrea Salvi, he is a scientist at the Joint Research Center working on the development of the Risk Data Hub of the Disaster Risk Management Knowledge Center. He will present to us the Risk Data Hub platform and the framework that was developed for assessing and monitoring the vulnerability to disasters in Europe. He will be followed by Ms. Malgorzata Oschwitz. She's a team leader in the statistics division of the European Central Bank, and she will explain to us how the data sets from the Risk Data Hub and other systems feed into the estimations of financial system exposures to climate-related risks. And finally, in the session, we will have Mr. Zintis Hermanssons, who's the project expert at the ESPON, the European Grouping on Territorial Cooperation. He will discuss the characterization of climate-related risks of European regions and the role of open access data in building such a collective knowledge. Mr. Andrea Salvi, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. So it is a great honor to be here today. And as anticipated, my brief presentation will be focusing on the DRMKC Risk Data Hub and on its recent methodological and data-related advancements. In particular, I will be focusing on our vulnerability assessment framework. And the content of today's talk is also presented in full details in our brand new interactive report available on the facts and figures section of the Risk Data Hub website. And a link should be provided to you. Now, onto the Risk Data Hub. The Risk Data Hub is a web GIS application that hosts, curate, and disseminate pan-European disaster risk management data. We do support multi-hazard, multi-asset, and multi-sector risk assessment, as well as curating an historical collection of disaster impacts data from open sources. We support several geographic level of aggregations following the Eurostat GISCO classification, thus from countries down to municipalities. And the platform is by its own nature intrinsically modular, meaning that it possesses a multifold structure that it will present in a minute, aiming to serve different ends, in particular those of monitoring, reporting, and analyzing DRM data. These also serve the purpose of supporting a vast host of stakeholders, from authorities at the national and local level, but also regional organizations, international organizations, research projects, project consortia, and domain expert. Now on to the next slide, please. This modularity of the system is embodied in a six-fold structure. And in fact, the platform is composed by the following modules that you can see recounted on the screen. A risk analysis module that in fact hosts and is able to generate on-demand risk data and risk estimations. The disaster loss and damage module, which contains historical loss and damage from open sources, as I mentioned. The DRM data from other project section, which is a container for external projects that we host there. The learning space, which is meant to provide users with a full training on the platform. And then the user corner, which is really the pulsating heart of the collaborative nature of the Risk Data Hub, as it allows users to upload their data, host them there, manage them, and as well as interact them with our database. Finally, the facts and figures section, which allows the user to generate ad hoc reports and host interactive spotlights on specific theme. As I mentioned, the contents of today's talk is in fact contained in one story map hosted there on vulnerability in Europe. Now, on to vulnerability itself. In the Risk Data Hub, we define risk as a function of hazards, asset exposed to that, so said hazards, thus exposure, and vulnerability of such assets or areas. This is crucial for a comprehensive assessment of disaster risk, as not all assets or systems or communities really are with the same level of exposure to a certain hazard are equally at risk. Therefore, we envisage two types of vulnerability: the hazard-dependent vulnerability and the hazard-independent one. The former relates to the physical vulnerability of an asset to specific hazard, whereas the latter refers to, which is the crucible really of today's talk, wants to capture those features of a system or a community that hamper its capacity to resist to stress or to exogenous stimulus that are hazards. As the name suggests, it is in fact entirely independent and is from the hazard and from the exposure, and in turn it wants to capture a more systemic feature of the community. Furthermore, our vulnerability framework is multi-level in nature, as shown in the next slide. We go from country level to NUTS3 level with this indicator to capture the different variations. And in order to build and to operationalize said indicator, we rely on 4 different pillars that are indeed shown in the slide. So the social, the economic, the political, and the environmental component that all together concurrently are able to provide us insights from the different aspects of the community we analyze. Now, as I said, the 3 spatial level of aggregations are crucial as they interact with each other and concur to the final indicator. In terms of actual operationalization, we do make use of 43 quantitative indicators, mainly drawn from Eurostat, but also from World Bank, UNESCO, European environmental agencies. And respectively, we do have 19 indicators for countries, 15 for NUTS2, thus regions, and 9 for NUTS3, thus provinces. It all results in a 0 to 10 indicator, where 0 is the minimum level and 10 is the maximum level, signifying the maximum level of vulnerability. Now on to the next slide. As you can see here, we have an animated capture of the story map that shows how we also offer a time variant version of our vulnerability indicator. We in fact produce such scores from 2005 to 2035 using projections of the single indicators. And as I said before, this story map present on our website allows to explore and dynamically map the vulnerability indicator over time at the country level. And it also mentioned to explore the different metrics that we provide. Now, some insights from our analysis. Looking at the general trend, if we over our sample, we can see that there has been a slight increase in vulnerability throughout the years. Now, this kind of approach, however, dilutes those regional specificities. For such reason, we make use of a cluster analysis also to allow users to explore the different trends divided by regions. So different behaviors are grouped together, as you can see in the slide, and we came up with 4 different clusters with 4 different behaviors. Some examples are recounted on the screen, but again, the full version of the story maps allow to explore that in more detail. Another step we took onto the next slide is that of analyzing how vulnerability is affected by those components that I mentioned earlier, thus the social, economic, political, and environmental component, how they concur to the final index. We can see that there are indeed different fluctuations at the regional level, and we wonder how are they affected by the single component and also by the regional and local aspects of each country. Therefore, we conducting principal component analysis, which again, the results are recounted in the story map, we identified 6 clusters with 6 different behaviors for each of them that are briefly recounted in this slide, where you see cluster 1, the next one, you can see cluster 2. And again, this is just to provide a brief overview of all the content that is available there. And due to time constraints, we can't really explore. But we strongly recommend to explore the dashboard and to visualize our data in this form to see how the different components interact with each other and how they concur to the broader indicator. This is another example of what the story maps and dashboard capabilities of our facts and figures section offers. And basically, it allows to generate metrics and statistics on the analysis we conducted on vulnerability in Europe interactively and essentially on demand, depending on the needs of the user. Thus, onto the takeaway. First, I would really recommend to explore the story map, as I said before, as well as our website, which including our learning corner, which include methodological resources and more insights on the methodologies we use, the methodology we do use. On to the takeaways, again, we presented very briefly what is our vulnerability framework, defined as an independent indicator for vulnerability of communities and areas. Our approach is indeed multi-layered and multidimensional to account for several pillars and several spatial aggregation. While the overall trend computed on our index shows a slight increase in vulnerability in our sample under consideration, so also including future projection, we disaggregated it further to account for regional patterns and analyze what are the determinants of said patterns. We saw that in general, typically and historically low vulnerability countries may show a slight increase if everything is left unchanged. So this, for example, could be an extremely relevant insight for policymakers and DRM communities to identify where and how to operate to reduce vulnerability in Europe. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrea. We move now to Ms. Malgorzata Auschwitz.
Hello. Yes, thank you. And so good morning, everyone. And thank you very much for the invite to this inspiring event and giving us the opportunity to share our experience with the Risk Data Hub. So first, climate change has a profound impact on the society and also the economy. And so the central banks have strong interest in contributing to tackle the climate change. and support the carbonization effort. So, so from the risk perspective, the climate change can lead to financial instability if the risks are not recognized. And that's why today I will present tools for the assessment of physical risk in the portfolios of financial sector. So, so here we have a simplified representation of spillover mechanism from physical hazards to financial system. So first, the natural disaster can cause direct damages to assets of a company or infrastructure, which can then result in business interruptions or supply chain disruptions. Then it can also have wider economic effects, for example, lower productivity due to heat stress or broader economic changes such as migration. In recent years, we also observed that extreme, previous slide, please. Yes, thank you. In recent years, we have also observed that extreme weather events can affect food and energy prices and lead to inflation, volatility, also very relevant aspect for a central bank. So those direct and indirect effects may in turn impact the financial situation of firms, resulting in reduced ability to repay their financial commitments. So, and also recurring disasters can result in higher cost of insurance or even inability of insuring against certain risks like flooding or wildfires, which is already experienced in some regions. So at the end of the chain are the financial institutions. The banks exposed to those companies face a higher risk of non-performing loans. For insurance sector, the increasing physical risk may limit the capacity of insurance to withstand more frequent and more concentrated disasters. And then from individual institution, the risk can propagate further into the financial system. Next slide, please. So to construct indicators which can measure the exposures of financial institutions to physical risks, 3 types of information are needed. So first, detailed information on the investment and loan portfolio of financial institutions. So then the physical location of a company and its assets in which financial institutions have invested. And finally, the information on physical hazards associated with these locations. So here, along with other public data, the Risk Data Hub constitute a key source of information. And so the availability of geospatial data is a huge advantage for us, so which allows to combine the climate information with granular financial data, so from credit securities and business registers. Next slide. So there are many other aspects which make Risk Data Hub an attractive data source. So first, it provides intensity and the frequency of hazards, which is very useful for deeper analysis. Second, the data are available at high resolution and for different time horizons. So the maps on the slide shows Frankfurt in Germany with blue areas representing flood risk from Risk Data Hub. And for us, working directly with geospatial files allows to compute flexibly various indicators at the chosen level of aggregation, such as countries or regions in a transparent way. And this is also an important advantage, so to use an established public source with transparent documentation and methodology that can be also freely shared. Next slide. So data from Risk Data Hub have been already used in various ECB publications. So there are 2 reports of the ECB SRB project team on climate and the ECB economy-wide climate stress test. So those are the flagship publications in the assessment of climate risk in financial stability. There are other publications planned for early next year. So the statisticians of the European System of Central Banks committed to develop new experimental indicators, including financial sector exposures to physical risks, where again the Risk Data Hub is a prominent source. We also contribute to the IMF book on data for greener world, where we elaborate on public sources for physical risk analysis and show applications of geospatial tools. So generally, climate analysis is a relatively new area for central bankers, and we are very grateful to the colleagues from Disaster Risk Management Knowledge Center for their continuous support. And but now I will look. I'm looking forward to other presentations, and without further ado, I will pass the floor to the next presenter. Thank you.
Thank you, Margojata. Unfortunately, Mr. Zentis Hermanssons had some connection problems, so Mr. Efren Feliu, he will present the project on his behalf. Mr. Efren Feliu, he's the Climate Change Adaptation Manager at Tecnalia Research and Innovation. The floor is yours, Efren.
Thank you very much. It was not expected to make the presentation from my side, but well, we will improvise and we'll tell you about this project. Perhaps, well, I will make it a bit briefer than what was expected with Syntis. Well, this is an ESPON is the European Spatial Planning Observatory Network, which is a European group of territorial cooperation. And well, this is a project developed by Tecnalia for ESPON about updating the ESPON climate report. If you can go to the next slide, please. Okay. So this is if I'm not wrong, the previous ESPON climate report, and there was well, it has been widely used across Europe for understanding climate-related vulnerability and risks in Europe at regional level. Well, Europe and the ESPON space, which is European countries plus 5 additional countries belonging to the ESPON space or contributing to the ESPON initiative. Can you go to the next slide, please? Well, the challenge for updating the ESPON climate report was, in one hand, importantly, updating the methodology, because previous ESPON report and the previous update was aligned to the old IPCC approach to risk assessment and risk components, and well, this was the first challenge. So trying to relate the previous variables used in the analysis to the current climate risk components of the IPCC, the 5th and the 6th report. On the other hand, another important challenge of this update was trying to align as much as possible with European data sources used already in the Risk Data Hub, the European Environment Agency, and the Climate Adaptation Data Portal, and therefore, well, aligning as much as possible this report with those data sources. Please go to the next slide. Okay, there you have, I will not detail all of them, but in the left bottom part, you have a list of the different data sources that we have used, and most of them, as I was saying, aligned and coming from the Risk Data Hub, and additionally, well, this use of climate information coming from the Copernicus Climate Change Service and the current European Climate Explorer at the EA Climate Adapt portal. You can go to the next slide. Okay, well, we have 8 different impact chains in which we have tried to understand the specific vulnerability of certain systems. Well, heat waves on population, flooding on infrastructures, etc. I will not go all over them. And we have used 4 climate scenarios in always looking at end of the century as time horizon, but using baseline RCP 2.6, RCP 4.5, and RCP 8.5. You can go to the next slide. Well, this is giving us, as a matter of fact, 64, because in all of them we have used absolute and relative exposure in order, well, to be able to compare. This is a presentation of the aggregated risks in Europe, baseline scenario, and RCP 8.5. And well, the territorial pattern is clear, with Mediterranean Europe, Southern Eastern Europe, plus Atlantic having a substantial increase of climate-related risk. Anyhow, I would call the attention on the specific impact chains and the possibility of digging into the data related to each of those 64 scenarios which are available through the ESPON Climate Update report. And I think, if I'm not wrong, this would be all from my side. Yes, sorry, I was a bit of improvising with this, but I hope it was clear, and we can comment in the discussion later anyhow.
Thank you very much, Efren, and thanks a lot for improvising. That was a very exhaustive also presentation of the project, and we will come back to it in the moderated discussion. We now move to the second part of the session, and we will welcome also 3 experts here. Ms. Carmen Poljansek, she's a researcher at the Joint Research Center, and she's the scientific coordinator of the INFORM at the Disaster Risk Management Knowledge Center. She will give us an overview of the INFORM initiative and some methodological aspects of the new released INFORM climate change risk. Then we will have Mr. Andrew Thau, who is the coordinator of INFORM at the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, UN-OCHA. Andrew will give us some insights into how INFORM climate change risk helps quantifying the impacts of climate and socioeconomic trends on the risks of the future of humanitarian crisis. And after Mr. Thau, we will have Ms. Isabel de Schrijver. She's the team leader of the evidence-based policy team and the Director General for Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid of the European Commission. She will provide an example of a concrete application of INFORM data in support to humanitarian aid funding allocation. Ms. Poljansek, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. It's a great pleasure to be here today. I hope that you see my first slide. Great, thank you. Let me start. INFORM Climate Change, a new product of the INFORM suite that adds a climate change perspective into the future risk of humanitarian crisis that I will present. Climate change undoubtedly, can we go back one slide? Thank you. Climate change undoubtedly results in more and more frequent and more intense climate-related hazardous events. And it is expected that these new pattern events occurrence will cause in countries with high vulnerability and low coping capacity the crisis with even more catastrophic outcomes. They will need even more in terms of humanitarian assistance, and they will set back in sustainable development. Next slide, please. INFORM Climate Change complements other INFORM products of INFORM suite, and they are INFORM Risk Index for prevention and preparedness, the INFORM Severity Index capturing the severity of evolving crises and supports mainly response, and INFORM Warning, still in development, but for monitoring early warning signals to support preparedness and early actions. And as you can understand now, they are designed to support decision-making at different phases of crisis management cycle. All INFORM products follow the same principles. They are global, they are open, reliable, and flexible, and even more, INFORM is developed together with partners. The Joint Research Center of European Commission is the scientific and technical lead of INFORM, and the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs is the coordinator. Next slide, please. The INFORM Climate Change Risk Index is an upgrade of INFORM Risk Index. An informed risk index was developed back in 2014. At that time, it was a new way to measure risk of humanitarian crises and disaster that exceeds national capacity to respond. Since then, it has become the global reference for the multi-hazard risk assessment. Informed risk models is based on the risk concept. It scores countries' risk in 5 categories from very low to very high. It uses 80 different indicators to measure hazards and people exposure to them, vulnerability, and lack of coping capacity. Next slide, please. While informed climate change incorporates climate-related hazard projection, demographic, and other socioeconomic projection in the hazard and exposure dimension to analyze future risk. The projections are based on the concentration pathways, known as RCPs, and socioeconomic pathways, known as SSPs, introduced by IPCC. Informed climate change calculates risk in 2050 and 2080, using a set of plausible RCP SSP scenario combinations from pessimistic to optimistic, and in this way, we are able to expand the uncertainty in the future risk due to climate change. The overall objective of the informed climate change is to develop a common evidence-based tool for the risk-informed decision-making that can help unify disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation strategy. And the main result of informed climate change are the change in risk and the vulnerability gap. Next, please. These maps show the change in risk and vulnerability gap for mid-century under pessimistic scenario combination RCP 8.5, SSP 3. The change in risk on the left refers to changes in risk scores relative to the baseline. The largest changes in risk are projected in West and Southern Africa, South America, and Western Asia. The vulnerability gap on the right shows the change in the vulnerability and lack of coping capacity required to maintain the baseline level of risk. The large increases in vulnerability gap experience countries in Africa, South America, and Western Asia. There are countries with the same change in risk and different vulnerability gap. Higher the vulnerability gap, more the countries should invest in adaptation measures to maintain current risk levels. Otherwise, the risk of humanitarian crisis will increase, and with that also humanitarian assistance need will probably increase as well. Even more, with the vulnerability gap, we can follow how disaster risk reduction and sustainable development strategies contribute to the adaptation efforts in a harmonized way. Next, please. You can explore the full set of results in our Inform Climate Change tool available online. You can easily navigate within different scenario combinations and different points in time, different hazard and exposure variables, exploring the changes in risk, vulnerability gap, and population count. It includes 4 main features: facts and figures, key changes, hazard projections, and country profiles. Next slide, please. Informed Climate Change offers a deep dive into quantified impacts of climate and socioeconomic trends on the risk of the future humanitarian crisis. Informed Climate Change helps make informed climate change policy choices. Next slide, please. Thank you for the attention. And now I'm passing the word to Dr. Andrew Toh from UN-OCHA to tell us more about the key findings of informed climate change analysis. And the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Carmen. Good morning, everyone. This work on informed climate change is really important because it's really the first time that we have some quantification of the impact of climate change on the risk of humanitarian crises. So for the next few minutes, I'd just like to present some of the main findings at the global level. Firstly, we can say, as Karma mentioned, that globally, we face significant increases in the risk of crises as a result of climate change. And that's true regardless of the emissions or demographic scenario we choose. Taking the pessimistic scenario, by 2050, we're looking at an increase of 45% in the number of countries classified as high or very high crisis risk. So that's from 36 today to 52. And the number of people living in only the very high risk countries will triple to 1.5 billion. So just for context, today, every single country that is classified by Inform as very high risk has a UN humanitarian appeal, as do 60% of the high risk countries. So without action to reduce these risks, we're facing significant increases in both the scope of crises geographically and also their scale. Next slide, please. And of course, these increases in risks will not affect all countries equally. Crisis risk will increase in all regions, but some will be much harder hit than others. The biggest projected increases will be in Africa, especially Eastern, Southern, and Western Africa. And there are also large projected increases in Central and South America, Western and Central Asia, and Micronesia. Next slide, please. Again, increases in risk won't affect countries equally. In terms of income group, the lower and lower middle income countries will be worst affected. These countries not only face the biggest increases in risk, but also the biggest vulnerability gap. So it's in these countries where most resources will be needed to reduce risk. And without increasing efforts to reduce vulnerability, these countries will frankly not be able to cope with the increasing risks. Next slide, please. Finally, let's look at the different drivers of increased risk of humanitarian crises. Of course, we're not able currently to make projections for all possible hazards, but we can say from Informed Climate Change that drought will most likely be the most important driver of increased humanitarian crisis risk. By 2050, more than 1.6 billion people, so that's 4 times the number today, will be exposed to severe and extreme droughts, and that includes more than 20% of the African population. There will also be more than 300 people exposed annually to river floods. That's double what we have today, and 70 million exposed to coastal floods, again, double the number today. And we are also expecting large increases in exposure to malaria-borne diseases like mosquito-borne diseases like malaria and dengue. So one of the useful outputs of Informed Climate Change is that it can tell us the relative importance of these different hazards, these different drivers in every country, and that can help us with adaptation planning. Next slide, please. We've seen, unfortunately, that increases in risk and the resulting crisis impacts are guaranteed. These occur under the pessimistic and optimistic scenarios in Informed Climate Change. However, there is quite a range in these results. So the good news is we can still limit these risk increases. So just for example, the number of people living in high and very high risk countries will almost double under the more pessimistic scenario, but increase by 35% under the optimistic scenario. So another major conclusion from this work is that we can still make a huge difference to future crisis risk through action on emissions, adaptation, sustainable development, and specifically building resilience in high-risk countries. And just as to finish, I'd like to just make a few points on how the humanitarian sector could contribute to this. So firstly, things like scaling up and improving early warning and anticipatory action and preparedness. In terms of financing, we need more predictable, flexible, and sustainable financing, and to integrate climate finance into the overall approach to humanitarian contexts. Secondly, acting longer term towards more common objectives, so integrating climate risks into humanitarian planning and making sure that humanitarian programming also supports climate resilience. And then lastly, acting together, being better connected, so working in a more joined up way across humanitarian development sectors and with local actors to make climate risk analysis and risk reduction a common and shared objective. We hope that Inform Climate Change can contribute to that. So thank you very much, and over to you, Christina.
Thanks a lot, Andrew. I pass the floor now to Isabel. Thank you, Isabel.
Thank you, Christina, and good morning, everyone. Next slide, please. Do you know that according to the United Nations in September 2022, more than 306 million people were in need of humanitarian aid, and that more than 66% of the requested funding remained unmet? Next slide, please. Since 1992, the Commission provides humanitarian aid to the victims of natural and man-made disasters in more than 110 countries so far. And this work is done with the support of more or less 200 partners, international organizations, NGOs, United Nations, Red Cross, etc. Next slide, please. What you see here, the map that you see here, and the countries in red are the countries that are currently supported by the European Commission through its humanitarian partners. But of course, this is not fixed. It is the situation for the moment, and it can vary from year to year depending on the crisis, the humanitarian crises. But how do you do when you have so many people waiting for humanitarian aid, not enough money, and that you want to provide fair support and be fair in the distribution of the humanitarian aid that you provide to the people and that you want to provide to the people all over the world? Next slide, please. So first part of the answer is in the humanitarian principles. We ask our partners, our humanitarian partners, to respect the humanitarian principles that you see here on the screen. I have no time to go through each of them, but look at the second one on impartiality, that says that the humanitarian aid must be provided only on the basis of the needs from the people, and this without any discrimination of gender, religion, country, etc. Next slide, please. The second part of the answer, we have put it in our methodology. We developed a methodology to allocate the funds, the humanitarian funds that we have, and which is for this year and more or less 1.5 billion. And so the method that we follow to try to be as fair as possible was to use the Inform indexes. So why do we do this? Well, because the scientific rigor and the robust methodologies that have been developed via Inform, and also the fact that the information behind this is neutral and independent. What is very important for us, because it has been collected, the data that is behind the indexes has been collected by people in different countries, and there is no favoring towards one or the other country. And for us, this is the best possible evidence, and it allows also to respect the humanitarian principles. So, and why the Inform? No, previous slide, please. Why the Inform risk? Well, Inform risk, as it has been told to you before, helps to identify the future crises that could overwhelm the capacity of a country to cope with it, and therefore the risk that the country might need humanitarian aid. And of course, the higher the value of the index, the higher the risk that the country will request humanitarian aid. Concerning the Inform severity, there you have the crisis that is already present in the country. You can have more than one crisis in the country, but you can also have one crisis that goes further than one country, one crisis that covers several countries. And here again, the index, the value of the index gives an indication of the severity. The maximum value is 5, and the higher the value of the index, the higher the severity of the crisis, and then also the higher the needs of the people. And this is why we have integrated these two elements in our methodology to allocate the funds. The informed climate change that was explained to you before has just been released. It is not yet in our methodology and in our algorithm, but for the moment we are working on the integration, and for the next exercise of the funding allocation, it will be included in the algorithm. Next slide, please. So what we have done to allocate, what we do to allocate the fund is that we use a funding allocation index that we created on the basis of the indexes that were just mentioned: informed risk, informed severity. And as I said, we work on the integration of the informed climate change, and we also introduce the people in need. We look at the people in need, the levels, how far, how much are the people in need, how are the conditions of the people, and we go from moderate to severe to extreme people. And this part of the people in need and the severity index are integrated in the algorithm together with the risk index. And together they build the quantitative information of our algorithm, of our funding allocation index, but we complete this information with expert information, because the Commission has more than 50 offices spread all over the world, where we have people that follow the situation, the humanitarian situation of the country or of several countries. And the advantage of integrating this information is that they sometimes have more recent information than the information that is included in the indexes. And this is why then this is balancing the information from the indexes. So we collected information from the experts based on questions, and the answers to the questions are then translated in a number that is then injected in the algorithm. Then in the end, what we do is that we use the total available budget, and that we distribute it proportionally to the index of the country. So each country that DG ECHO, that the Commission can support, has a value of the funding allocation index, and then we do proportionally the distribution of the budget towards each country. Nevertheless, this is not the final budget that is in the end allocated to the country, because there are after this other elements, because of course the situation of a country can change very fast, very quickly, and so it can happen that the budget is adapted also throughout the year depending on the crises that occur. But this is our method to try to allocate the funds that are at our disposal in a fair way towards the countries that are the most in need. Next slide. Yeah, I give the floor back to Christina. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Isabel, and I would like to thank also all the presenters for their interventions in the session. We have seen that from the different interventions that the common line between the systems and the framework that were presented is disaster vulnerability. In particular, the presentation of the Risk Data Hub showed that the quantification and the mapping of vulnerability are essential for understanding disaster losses and for assessing risks. Andrea Salvi, I would like to start a bit this conversation with you by asking you, what are the limitations of the approach implemented in your system, knowing that the vulnerability is often understood as area-specific or hazard-specific?
Yes, thank you, Christina. Well, in a way, as described briefly in the presentation, our indicators refers only to, at least our independent indicator refers only to the vulnerability of the community we are representing in itself. Therefore, while it may be somewhat area specific, it does not encompass any physical information on the hazard to date. So that is definitely one limitation that may apply. To some degree, we can say, as far as area goes, we try to capture as much as possible the descriptive feature and the systemic features of each level of analysis, even to NUTS 3, thus provinces. This is, of course, much harder as we narrow down the scope. And it's not a case that we do have way less indicators for NUTS 3 as compared to country level. The political dimension, for instance, is still without any indicator in the current iteration. So we may be missing some specificities and idiosyncrasies of specific areas. And this is an important aspect to bear in mind for future iterations of the indicator. And but to date, what we are trying to do actually is to capture the systemic vulnerability or capacity, or actually the vulnerability of certain areas, taking a generalized approach driven by literature-informed indicators.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrea. Malgorzata, you provided us also with a very good application of the data that's available in the Risk Data Hub for estimating the exposure of financial institutions to physical risks. According to you and your experience, what are the remaining data gaps in the risk assessments and that you can see from your work?
Yes, thank you. So a lot of progress has been done as presented today, but indeed there are many challenges remaining. And so I would see the three areas for improvement. So within this framework of hazards, exposures, and vulnerability. So first for the hazards, so modeling of the compound and co-occurring events poses many challenges. From my understanding, also for the climate scientists, but those are the rare events with high potential damages and are crucial for the proper risk assessment. So second, with respect to exposures, so we need to better identify firms' assets and their location, and also cover household sector. So this is on our to-do list. And the third area is vulnerability. So damage functions are key ingredients for estimations of expected losses, and I think they should be better tailored to assess asset characteristics, its location, and account also for adaptation measures, and to assess recovery capacity. So we would need more information on insurance, but the granular data are still lacking there. So those are challenging issues, but closing data gaps is a common effort, and we are looking forward to the collaboration.
Thank you so much. That indeed links very well to the next question I had to Efren. It would be also interesting to hear from you how you deal with uncertainties in future risk while combining future climate scenarios with the present vulnerability and exposure as used in the ESPON project, and eventually how you communicate this uncertainty to the decision makers.
Yes, well, definitely not including in the analysis trends or future scenarios of socioeconomic factors is an additional limitation to the ones that we are sharing today, quite honestly. But and of course, this implies having a bit more uncertainty or additional uncertainty to the one already related to climate projections, which have inherent uncertainty too. One of the recommendations of the ESPON Climate Update report is precisely in the future trying to include projections, socioeconomic projections in the analysis. Anyhow, it's not unreasonable to assume that where we find current vulnerabilities or in the geographies that we already have vulnerability to natural hazards will be better, in worst conditions to face climate-related challenges, and therefore that the territorial pattern, or understanding the territorial pattern of current system vulnerabilities to projected or future climate could be a good way to understand how are we placed for future hazards and risk. And this one important message, I believe, is that climate adaptation should take into account no regrets policies and measures, which are going to be oriented towards reducing current risks, while at the same time contributing to no regret benefits in long term, like sustainability, societal resilience, in a broader precautionary principle application, to say it somehow.
Yes, thanks a lot, Efren. We'll take into account these recommendations, and we look forward also to reading the report. I hope you can post also online the link to the report. Carmen, I would like to know from you what are the advantages and limitations of the composite indicator approach that's used in INFORM? If you can very briefly tell us about this.
Thanks, Christina. Yeah, maybe it's a really great opportunity to say, because many INFORM products, all INFORM products at the moment are composite indicators. We found them to be a very powerful tool, and they help us to think in a bigger picture. It helps us to explain the drivers or complicated issues, complex phenomena to the decision makers as well. And for the better understanding, usually is not the final value that matters the most. It is actually this transparent process from choosing the indicators and making a choice how to put them together that matters the most. Composite indicators therefore facilitate the explanation of how risk drivers affect risk, and in our case, recent case in INFORM climate change, facilitates also the simplified interpretation of climate hazard and demographic projection data in context of the future risk. But on the other side, of course, there are also the drawbacks of the using of a composite indicators. Unfortunately, they cannot bring in uncertainties, simply because individual indicators are always normalized. All the results are relative, and we lose absolute values component, and we have to leave the probabilities behind as well. But what do we gain is actually comparability and ranking feature. And these are actually two things that can bring data to the next level and really help for better decision making. I think that's it.
Thanks a lot, Carmen. Andrew, and also related to the presentation of INFORM climate change, how does INFORM climate change contribute to better anticipation of humanitarian crisis? And how do you factor risks related to climate change in humanitarian programs?
Thanks, Christina. I think what INFORM climate change does is it gives us that long-term perspective on crisis risk. So although the timeline of these projections is longer than humanitarians would typically plan for, the impacts are happening now. So that direction of travel is already set. So it helps us understand the risk landscape in the coming years, which is very important. And also to know these risks so we can contribute to building resilience, and then also connect humanitarian interventions with longer term risk reduction and adaptation activities. And then lastly, on the funding, we would expect and hope that the vast majority of funding to reduce crisis risk is coming from other sources than humanitarian aid. So we hope that this kind of tool can direct that kind of funding to the right places and prevent future crises and the need for a humanitarian response, because by then it's already too late. It's much more humane and much more cost effective to prevent these crises in the first place. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew. And the last question is to Isabel. You showed a concrete application of the INFORM climate change. And I would like to know, according to you, which other policies INFORM climate change intends to inform and bridge? You're muted, Isabel.
We have another methodology that we developed to support the forgotten crises, which are crises that do not receive enough attention and therefore do not receive enough funding to try to be solved. And based on the same indexes, based on the same inform indexes, we developed a methodology to try to raise attention for these countries and for these crises all over the world. So this is another concrete example. That's where we use the inform indexes, and where we will also apply later on the inform climate change elements as well.
Thank you, everyone. I think we need to close, unfortunately, the session, which, despite the many questions, also we still have also in the chat. But I would like to thank you all, and I think that this session provided very good insights into the question of why does vulnerability matter. And I also would like to thank Andre Morera, who was behind the Slido, and all our panelists. And thank you also to the organizers of this session. Have a nice day. And I would like to also continue the discussion beyond this COP27 side event. Bye-bye.